Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas, and I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about building ambitious indie games. Building an ambitious game is not just about making something bigger or more complex. It's about knowing what matters most, what supports the experience, and what can quietly pull the project off course. So today, we're going to explore how developers can approach scope, workflow, and decision-making more strategically so they can build games with depth, scale, and intent without losing clarity, momentum, or control. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everyone, and we're back, and today with us I have Nate Purkeypile. Nate, how's it going, man? And thank you so much for being here today.
It's going good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is going to be a real fun conversation. But before we get into that, folks, Nate here is a founder of Just Perky Games. And I would love to hear about what you do there, Nate. What is, Just Perky Games, what kind of games you make, and also a little bit about yourself, your background and everything, so we can kind of get a sense of like who you are, what you've done. I think, I'm really interested to hear that.
Yeah, so I've been in games for quite a while now, I guess, like 22 years, it looks like.
Awesome.
And about 14 of those, like the most notable part of the career, I guess, is at Bethesda. So I worked on like Fallout 3, Skyrim, Fallout 4. I was like the lead artist on Fallout 76, worked on Starfield. So that was a huge chunk of time, and I learned a lot there. But after that, I went indie, and I have been a solo indie developer for about 5 years now. And I've put out 2 games so far. First was The Axis Unseen, which is like a heavy metal horror game where you hunt monsters from folklore.
Awesome.
The other one was like this crazy little side project called Deedly Doo Carcour, where you have this like Play-Doh car that rocket jumps around, and all the sound and music is just mouth sounds. It was completely different vibe for like a horror folklore thing. And now I'm working on my 3rd game, which is like a 1980s horror synth wave kind of thing. And I'll be announcing that soon.
All right. I think I'm interested. I'm sure a lot of us listening to will be as well. But man, really exciting stuff. Everything from your background and these like cool, diverse projects and stuff, especially. And you said it's 1980s going to have a lot of synthwave in it.
Yeah, I have a whole custom soundtrack that I worked with the same guy as my first game.
Okay.
My first solo indie game.
Oh.
And yeah, so I'm super jazzed about that. And because he's also like one of my favorite metal musicians, which is how I got in touch with him in the first place. There's this band, unfortunately, called ISIS that I loved back in the day.
Yep.
But I just like emailed their Bandcamp page.
That's awesome. And such a great little story right in there because, I think we've talked about this in other episodes before, this type of thing. And even as far back was with Game Bakers. They had a huge list of people they wanted to work with in terms of their audio, their music specifically. And they're like, wow, we listened to these people. And top of the list was Daft Punk, which unfortunately they didn't get. But the fact that they reached out, I think, is awesome. But they just went down that list or whatever and like, hey, who would really, really be cool to have? And I can't remember who it is, but it was for Fury in particular. And man, that
Carpenter Brewed.
Yeah, that soundtrack is like, okay, you and I know.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that band. It's a huge inspiration for the soundtrack for my game. I'm even seeing them in 3 days.
Oh, sweet. So, but again, the story goes is like, it's doable. Don't put people on a platform or pillar just because of what they're known for. Hey, we're all people. We're pretty nice.
Yeah.
Great story there. Thank you for sharing that. But yeah, folks, now let's get into some other stuff. And one thing that I want to know a little bit I don't do this as often as I'd like to for sake of time, but Nate, when you're not busy with your own projects and all this other cool stuff you're working on, what do you do to unplug a little bit? What do you do to kind of relax or just get out there and do something different other than game related stuff? Even if it is more game related stuff, it's okay.
Before I had kids, I did climbing a whole bunch and brewing
Nice.
beer, gardening. And
I used to
lately
do
we've
beer.
been doing like cross-country road trips since, I'm doing the solo indie thing, right? And like
Yeah,
work wherever. So
exactly. Yeah.
last summer we drove all the way across the United States and like stayed around like Seattle for about a month, and then I drove all the way back and was working on my game in that time. I just have my absurdly loud laptop because it's pretty beefy, able to work wherever.
And when you say loud, you mean like fan loud, like it sounds like an airport going on?
Yeah, thankfully I have headphones on most of the time, like rocking out to music and I don't
Yeah,
even
yeah.
notice. But if I take them off, I'm like, geez, that thing is loud. It's got like a mobile 4090 or something ridiculous.
That's awesome. And out of curiosity, what's your favorite beer that you like to brew?
The one that I did the most that I liked how it turned out was a Marzen. That one turned out pretty well.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that. I dabbled and brewed some beer for a while. It was more like mainstream, lagers and pilsners and things like that. But cool. Oh,
Yeah.
I like
I
that.
haven't gotten around to doing a lager since you gotta like refrigerate it just right and for the
Yeah, it's
fermentation.
chemistry. I never even took chemistry, so it's like, a bit of alert. You don't really need to know chemistry to brew beer, but it's kind of like an exact science type thing. Like you said,
Yeah, it's kind of like
temperatures.
baking and stuff.
Yes, exactly. Oh, cool. Thank you for sharing that. And now, yes, we do want to get to know you just a little bit more. And how we're going to do that, folks, is through the Q Box round. And I prepared some quick, fun, random questions here for Nate today. So, Nate, are you ready for the Q Box round?
Definitely.
All right, let's do it. Oh, I'm so happy we're doing this one. And that is, what is your biggest gaming pet peeve?
Oh man, this is easy for me, especially because I have kids. It's games where you can't pause. Like
Yes.
Elden Ring, I love you, great game, but the fact that you can't pause sucks. Like I know it's like online. It's like, yeah, sure, if someone's invading me, I get it. But if no one's actually in my world, just let me pause, man.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, you have no idea. Yeah, same with my kids too. Like there's a pro and a con here. So most of the games are like, but I can't pause. I can't pause. Like whether it's Roblox, whether it's something else, I'm like, oh my goodness, I get it. Because especially if it's like playing with other players, multiplayer. But then
Right.
on the flip side, if they're not doing multiplayer, let's say if they're playing the Nintendo Switch, I'm like, oh, you can pause. Watch. You just hit the power button. And it
Yeah,
just goes
like
right back, which is really nice and convenient. But
that's one of the things I love about the Steam Deck for the same reason.
yeah,
Like the fact that you can't do that kind of thing on a regular PC is a bummer because you're like, when did this even save? I don't know.
yeah,
Some
exactly.
games tell you, which should be required if you ask me, like, oh, it saved 2 minutes ago. But others, it's just like, I have no idea, man.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Next is, why do you make games?
I make games just because I've always been incredibly interested in them. And I always knew it was a field that was going to be changing a whole bunch throughout my life. Because, like, I mean, I started making games before we had color. So seeing how things have evolved has been fascinating. And there's like always something new to learn. You're not just like doing the same job day in and day out. It's changed dramatically.
Nice. And last but not least, and the staple here on the show is, what game are you playing now?
Right now, I'm playing Lords of the Fallen, which I guess relates to my not pausing pet peeve, but I'm really enjoying the game because a lot of those like Souls-like games I kind of bounce off because they're not quite as good as the FromSoft games. But this one's really cool. It has like the cool twist with like worlds layered on top of each other, and you can like pull up this lantern to look at the other one, and swap between the worlds. It's pretty cool.
Nice. Awesome. Appreciate you sharing all those things about yourself, allowing us to get to know you a little bit more. And now let's get into the heart of this conversation, folks, which I led in with the intro, is building ambitious indie games. Because honestly, we're kind of wanting to, I think all of us secretly really want to do that, right? Whether we admit it or not. But by all means, we should. But it's a challenge. It's difficult. And there's so many different things to navigate, right? And, Nate, to kick things off, a lot of indie developers, like I just called out, want to do this. They want to build ambitious games. But what do you think they misunderstand most about what that actually requires?
I think one of the biggest things that a lot of independent developers don't really do is honestly just like production and tracking how long things take and actually scheduling it out. Like you don't have to get ultra granular about it, but I do set some pretty like what my major milestones are and like a week by week breakdown and keep track of things, how long things took. And I think that's incredibly important to have that kind of discipline and pay attention to how things are going. But you also always want to have like, called like the fudge factor of like things go wrong and there's unknowns and things do change. So it's not to say you have to have it completely locked down, but you do need to keep track of that and be mindful.
Yeah, it's so hard sometimes too, right? Because it's like I think some of us out there are like, oh, I'm aware of that, and I should probably do this, but then and I can relate to this myself too in my own work. But it's like, oh, but if I'm doing that, I'm not developing. So how do we address that, or how do we maybe change our mindset a little bit around those situations?
I mean, that's true that it's not developing, but at the same time, if you're not paying attention to how the whole thing is going, at least to some extent, then you can really kind of not see the forest through the trees anymore. And it's really easy to get bogged down. Because the other thing I would say is that most people spend too much time perfecting everything. And I think it's better to like just get stuff done and loop back around to it later. Because people kind of get like stuck on these things and just like keep polishing it and polishing and polishing it. And you kind of even lack perspective on whether or not what you're doing matters. It's not to say that like polish doesn't matter, but there's diminishing returns for sure. And like, that's something I had to learn at Bethesda. Like there's no way you could ship those games if you're like ultra polishing everything because they're just so massive. You learn a lot every time you move on to something new and like loop back around later.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's really about like everything from prioritization and also understanding of how maybe, and I actually had a similar moment with something I'm working on right now where it's like, I was talking to someone about it and they're like, yeah, you also want to make sure. He wasn't saying that I was doing this necessarily, but it really spoke to me later and reflecting where he said the term, you want to make sure you're not building in a vacuum. And then I quickly realized, oh, wait, I think I might have got a little too hyper focused on stuff. And I like to be someone who prides in that I don't do that, or at least regularly. But hey, we're all human. And what you just called out is so important to kind of identify it. And again, there's benefits that come from that when you start realizing those things. And hey, we're not perfect. The game's never going to be perfect. Let's not dwell on these things and try to monitor ourselves as best we can. So really good stuff there. I want to try to get into defining a bit like, ambition is and stuff without letting that scope take over, like, scope creep and all that stuff. So when a developer really wants to build that ambitious title, where should they start? So kind of that ambition, excitement, whatever, stays grounded and in a clear vision. Because, yeah.
For me, I like to start with, some people call it like a vertical slice or a prototype. And it's getting like, I start with like 5 minutes of the game that's fun, and then like an hour, and just proving out the core of the game without just trying to finish the whole thing from the start. And you can figure out how fast you can actually do things. Focus on what are like some of the parts you might be most worried about. Like I was most worried about, honestly, like the programming and design side of things when I went indie. So I sort of prioritized some things that I might not have, like setting up menus and save systems. Like, am I going to be able to do this whole game? Essentially treat it as like a shippable product, because it's really easy to just have like this more game jammy kind of thing that's like missing a lot of those other random things. But I think always treating your game like you're about to ship it can be really beneficial, and keep it stable and figure out what all those different things. And hey, it turns out sometimes UI and menu work can take a lot more time than you're going to think.
Yeah, that's true. So I like that perspective too, but I'm wondering for some other people that might like look at that like, oh, that could be overwhelming to then even think about that when I really just want to get to that core idea. What would you say to people that are thinking maybe a little bit differently from that perspective too? Is it just like picking the one thing that you see is going to really just drive your momentum, but also like doing what you can to kind of keep those other factors that you called out to in focus to some degree?
Yeah, you kind of just have to balance the two. But I think if you're trying to keep it in a more shippable state like this, like you mentioned, working in a vacuum, and if you're keeping it more shippable, it's a lot easier to actually like just have more and more people play test over time. And I try and be really conscious about that and constantly bring in new people and have them play. And if it's the parts are all scattered on the floor and you're like, oh, but I'm working on this awesome system, as opposed to, you can play this part and the whole game's kind of getting better, but then you're also improving all those things. Like, yeah, on one hand, you are kind of getting sidetracked in a way and not making as much like forward progress. But then you're kind of going over your core game and making sure it's actually good and iterating on that before you just keep going. Because you can like spend a whole bunch of time on like some system or something that turns out no one actually cares about, or it's not fun.
Thinking about this more, I really like that framing. Keep it more shippable, because what it really does is it immediately sets up constraints, right, for you. And by doing that too, by setting up these constraints earlier on, and you've probably seen this in some way. I've definitely seen this where, like, one of the biggest things that you hear people talking about and stuff, hey, make sure your demo is in a really good shape and stuff. And sometimes people put it out there. They're like, well, it's just a demo, or, oh, it's still an alpha or beta. And then when people are seeing it, like, how frustrating is it when everybody's like, hey, I saw this bug. And we're like, yeah, we know. But it's like, and how do you move forward and stuff? But that mindset that you just called out to, that focus, keep it shippable. Well, yeah, like I was calling out to before, we may want to try to focus on and have very valid reasons to prioritize maybe other things in that project. That shippable thing, that constraint sounds like it's at least something that is more likely to set you up for success, however you define that, down the road, downstream. So when problems do arise, at least it's within, you're at least going in a really good direction, I would say. And that's why I really like that a lot.
Yeah, you're going to have a lot fewer problems to solve. And I do think that helps you a lot with development, because if you're keeping it shippable, you're not going to be like crashing all the time. You're going to know how it plays, even for you, versus like I've worked on projects where it's 100% not this way. And it's just like a mess the whole time. And everyone's like, I don't even know what this game is supposed to be like. You can't play it for more than 5 minutes. And it's really hard to even stay motivated on a project like that, where you don't even know as a developer, like what you're making and how that plays.
Yeah, that's a really good point there too, which we've talked about burnout and things like that, but it's like, it's those little pieces and layers of fatigue that really leads up to those things. And I think that's an important call out, because if we don't identify those signals or signs, it's like, what is it? The boiling frog syndrome, if you will, where a frog can be in water that's lukewarm and comfortable, and then but the temperature is gradually increasing, and then next thing you know, you're like, oh crap, it's boiling. What do I do? And that's and here we are. And how do we adjust in panic mode, which is never fun and very hard to do.
Yeah, and I think it's asking a lot of people to maintain faith that a game is going to be good. And like, you hear it a lot with like, oh, the magic all comes together at the end. You hear it from like BioWare and all these other studios, but I think that's like super intellectually dangerous too, to like, it's all going to come together at the end. It's like, what if you're wrong? Like, what if there's major problems?
There's one thing to have beliefs, and beliefs are important, but beliefs with action are in commitment, and those things are written, and supporting those that support those beliefs are what are going to get you moving forward. And before we go on to the next question, I do want to call out too, when you said keep it shippable, I love that too, because by design, like through that comment itself, it really hones in as well as on the stuff that will move the needle. And I think that's a concept and things we don't really like think about too much and focus on, because like keeping it shippable basically addresses that. It's like, hey, what are the things that can actually create impact for us as a studio, as a developer, but also for players? And wanted to say that too, because so many times I think it's hard for us to understand really what does move the needle, what does getting that momentum and progress really mean. And I think such a nice, simple phrase to use to encompass so many different things. Now,
I agree.
When it comes to things like ideas, what concepts to focus on, right? Like, how do you figure out which ideas are really going to truly support the core experiences that you're creating, and which ones are just making the project bigger? I mean, maybe you can share a little insight to your process with your own projects, or what you're working on now. What are you doing to really hone in on that core experience and not making it bigger, or at least not yet? Or you tell us.
I think part of it can be, you can glean from like that production aspect of it and see how much your schedule is changing as you add stuff. But the question I always like to ask myself is like, am I adding this because it's cool, or because it's like actually notable and important, like a significant chunk of extra coolness to the game. Because in a lot of cases, people will just like be interested in making something. Like it doesn't actually need to be there.
I absolutely, because yeah, it is an interesting thing to look at things that way and like really consider what it is, what really needs to be there, and everything else. And on that note too, I'm kind of curious, like, what would you say are some early signs that we might notice that our ambition, right, that big grand vision, is really starting to turn into overscope, feature creep, whatever we want to call it, scope creep.
I think if you have no idea what your release date is, or if that keeps shifting over and over and over, those are the obvious big red flags. Like, I think it's good to, even as an indie, have completely made up, fairly hard deadlines. Some people don't have them, or they're just like, oh, whatever, I'm going to move it later. But you do need to, like, you're going to learn something every time you ship stuff, honestly. So just, it's okay to like call it at some point and move on. Especially, I would say, if you haven't like announced it or put out demos and stuff like that, you really want to validate how much time should be spent on the thing, because it might not be as cool as you think, or it might go viral and it like turns out everybody loves it. I think it's good to like have it more audience tested before you're going to spend like years and years on something.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, and when completely, like, that validation process is so important. And when you talk about deadlines, like, how else do you think this could be approached in different ways? Because I see an opportunity here from some of the things you brought up about, like, hey, you got to get out there, you got to get it validated. There's lots of different ways. So when it comes to deadlines, the most obvious ones are like, oh, when do we announce? When is the demo? When do we launch?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Those are going to be those core beats, everything, without a doubt. But what about other deadlines? Like, maybe I can finish up this part of the game, and then the deadline is to and goal, not just to have it done by this, but also maybe share something or have it as be a non-negotiable validation point where we're putting it out in some way, shape, or form. Like, breaking down deadlines and to things and objectives like that, would you say are helpful?
Yeah, on the Axis I'm seeing, I did like these themed major milestones where it was like every 6 months there was a big one, like, oh, now the whole open world exists, now all the creatures exist, stuff like that, that gave me kind of like this goal that I was shooting for at a certain point. And then I would put out a video around them, like, here's a tour of like this big open world. And those were like really motivating and like this solid anchor point, without it being, oh, I'm going to finish this one corner of this one region by X date.
Yeah, because I think what you just described there is important, because a lot of times when we think of deadlines, we think of, oh, it's a date. And let's face it, we know a lot of us, because just being human, don't have the best internal accountability. Like, external, we do. So if someone, your boss, whoever, is telling you, hey, you need to get this done by this time, hey, I have my integrity to care about, I have my job, whatever it might be, and what you're believing, that's going to be easier to accomplish because of those other factors. But internally, you're like, oh, I could just push it off to next week. So, but what you're outlining from your process and what you do is nice, because you're looking at like, oh, it'll be really cool. I'm excited to get this thing out there. I know I don't need to like work on so many details things, because what I'm really, it sounded like you were shifting that focus over towards like, hey, I'm hitting this cool objective, this milestone that I'm really excited about, and then I'm really excited to get that input. And regardless of what it is, it's just nice to feel that like you get a sense of accomplishment, you in progression. And in a way, it sounds like I'm sure you pick up on it, but you're almost like gamifying the game making process in a way.
I just view tasks, I think, just especially from being at Bethesda for a long time, like I view tasks differently than a lot of people, where they'll think, how much time does it take? And I think of, how much time do I have?
Yes.
Like, it's very, very different. And most things are scalable in that amount of like how much time it takes. And it doesn't have to take that amount of time, and you're going to get so much faster by practicing more and more.
Absolutely. And that gets me into another area I want to talk about too, which is talking about building efficiently but also without losing depth. Because I think some of us could view these things as, okay, that's great. We're building a little bit faster. We're focusing on these things. But are we losing kind of like the passion or the depth or however else we're interpreting this, right? So with these things, when we have like a clear vision established and anything else to give us that clarity and direction, what would you say helps developers actually build in a way that is really staying focused and sustainable?
I think if you want to be focused and sustainable, a big part of it is having this ethos and also not crunching, at keeping clear eyes. Because even though it is sort of counterintuitive, I think approaching things this way, where you get things done, move on, and then come back, you're going to be getting a lot more done, and you're going to come back with clear eyes. And it's like in college, I used to sit in the back of the class and just people spend a lot of time not actually working. So I think if you just feel like now is work time, I'm going to get stuff done, and then not work. And you're just going to like always maintain that forward momentum. And it's really, really easy to lose that. And like, if you're able to work like 16 hours and you're actually getting stuff done the whole time, great. But I don't think most people actually work that way. And it's like this, just productivity falls off. So just recognizing that, getting stuff done, moving on, move back later. As a solo dev, that's one of my favorite things. Like, you always have clear eyes because you like come back, you're like, I haven't touched this in like 6 months. I have no idea what I was thinking.
Yeah, it's so key too. And I can't remember if I shared this in one episode recently or not, but I was recognizing that something similar in my own work, where it's like, hey, look, some of the things I'm doing, the projects I'm working on, there's a lot of context shifting. Like I go from this type of thing to another thing. And like for me personally, if I have meetings after a meeting, like I am like, I don't know what it is, because we perceive, and myself included, meetings are like, oh, they're not that taxing. Like you're just talking. There's no big deal going on here. But then like after it, I'm like, oh my goodness, I feel drained for some reason, but it's early in the day. Like how do I, and what I started to do is recognize things in terms of, I think what you're like call outs. And I think it relates just what you said in a more detailed way, but it's like, okay, if there are these context shifts that need to happen, if I am doing one thing and have to completely switch into now dad mode or do something else or work on something that's very demanding versus what I was doing a moment ago, like how can you structure things in a way to make sure you're efficient and focused on whatever it is you have to have that attention for? And what I was realizing is giving yourself space and some time. And one thing I notice is like sometimes it's just taking a quick walk around the neighborhood. Other times it might be a quick meditation for 10 minutes just to like purposely try to tell my brain to shut off on everything and then go back at it. Or even structure things where it's like, hey, what needs my motivated focus now? And how can I transition so the next focus comes easily? And yeah, I go a little bit on, I digress for a moment there, but it sounds like it kind of relates to what you're calling out in terms of like, hey, understanding where that time is, giving yourself space needed, and how to kind of make those shifts. And that really leads into the efficiency and making it sustainable and probably keeping it fun too.
Yeah. And you mentioned context switching. And I think that's the other way that I like structure stuff is where I try and cluster stuff as much as possible. Like I'm going to take care of all this marketing, biz dev stuff. And I'm going to do all this world art stuff, like respond to bugs. By keeping it clustered that way, I think you're going to avoid a lot of that context switching and stuff like that. And I think that can be done with meetings and stuff too. And obviously like less of a problem in the indie space, but still like if you can try and get as many of those things in one day, it's like, yeah, that one day might be less fun, but you're not going to have all that downtime on the other days. And like you said, it's like leading up to it, I think there's a loss in productivity, and afterwards.
Yeah.
You can even, I would just say cancel half the meetings in most cases, and you don't actually need them. Like I did that when I was leading 76. Those were fine like weekly for a while, but as we got towards ship, there's some point where you're like, everyone knows what they should be doing. You don't actually have to meet every week, meet every other week or like as needed, and you can gain a whole bunch of time.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I've realized that too. Sometimes I try to emphasize those points in certain situations and stuff. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I think we form these habits and ideas of what is either supposed to be or what we feel like is ideal. And sometimes taking a moment to realize, like, hey, look, if like you said, if everybody knows what they're doing, why don't we capitalize on that time to, and not only that, like when you said clustering too, yeah, there might be days you put all that stuff together. And then after, though, at least with me, I'm like, oh, okay, that was tough. But you know what? I am so pumped now to get into the really good, hard thinking type work or really dive into the project. And that's a good feeling to have that type of like energy after a long, hardworking day on maybe meetings or maybe just something that's not as fun. And then because I think that energy can compound, like where you're even more efficient because you have that the excitement towards that next project or thing that you're working on.
Yeah, for sure. Like at Bethesda, they used to do these game jams every once in a while, and people got so much done in that like week of time. And they're like, oh, why couldn't people get this much done normally? It's, well, you realize a lot of it is basically there's two things. One is they're working on what they want to, but also they're not having to do all these meetings.
Yeah. There you go. And so it's funny because it's like sometimes that's why when we say like unplug, take a break and stuff. And yeah, vacations can help with that. For me personally, I'm not a fan of that, but there's still that value that comes of it. Again, spacing those things out, understanding like you're calling out, like so many different ways to approach it. So, and they do work. As you said, even at Bethesda, you do the game jam things and people are like, yeah, fire it up and everything else. So good stuff. On the similar note and everything, I'm curious too, like how do you make practical production decisions without stripping away, parts of the game that give it depth or identity? Because I know that's one thing we kind of led into this particular conversation. And I'm sure, especially if, again, for some of us still being like, all right, I really want to keep it more shippable idea in there. But now if I'm looking at this, what do we do to prevent stripping away the parts of the game that we think are really going to like make it unique, distinct? And a lot of times we see that in terms of maybe the depth or identity the game has. How do we keep that from happening?
I think it is a tough call for sure, and can just be born out of play testing and figuring out what really matters to you. But I think a lot of it also has to do with what even the core idea of the game was to allow you to build that depth without it becoming like this unsustainable, unshippable thing. Like if you're running into that situation, maybe you just bit off more than you could chew and should have started with like a little bit of a smaller project and ramp up. It's like, I didn't do this, but I probably should have when I went indie, like start small, just ship something, build up from there. Because you see it all the time. Oh, I'm going to go indie and build an MMO or something. Like, whoa.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, no, good takes, because it's always a case too. From what I understand and seen, is like, all right, you have your scope, you have your idea, great. Now cut it in half, and then cut it in half again. Like, keep going those steps and stuff, because it's like, if you don't do that, and yeah, you're right, it can be hard. Sometimes like, oh, I'm really attached to this, I'm really like sold on this, but I don't know. You tell me what you think about this. Like at the end of the day, it's still really about, is this fun? And just because you're cutting things out, it can be fun. I mean, look at some like very casual mobile game experiences that are still fun, and they're very, very basic mechanics. Like there's not too much involved. If I'm really distilling it here, I'm not talking about any like live ops or monetizations aspects here either, because that's a whole nother story. But still, like, sometimes the simplest things are all you really need to do, and then some a little extra. I mean, but yeah, I mean, what are your takes on that type of stuff in terms of like really just finding the fun as much as you possibly can in even the most simple experiences? Like they can carry some weight too, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to approach it, and that's ultimately why people are going to be playing a lot of games. And some of them might be super in depth, but I tried to structure my projects that way, where even though my first one was gigantic, it was also like my 6th or 7th open world game or whatever. So I wasn't actually worried about the open world part of it. So systemically, it was not actually that complicated of a game. It's like you and a bunch of monsters basically, and you level up and stuff, but that's about it. And the second one was fairly simple, but I did add multiplayer to it because I was like, oh, how hard is multiplayer going to be? Because if I did that on the first game, even though it wasn't that complicated, it was still like big open world and all these creatures and stuff, versus the second game was cars and explosions. So I really only had to network two things really. But that at that point I knew Unreal pretty well, and then I knew how hard multiplayer was. So that's why my latest game is like the most complicated of them systems wise, with like a lot going with AI scheduling and all these different environmental interactions and multiplayer. It's like, that's a lot. And like biting that off for my first game, I think would have been a mistake. In general, being very wary of multiplayer it's a good idea. It's easily going to like double or triple the amount of time you're going to take on things.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know what? You said something else I really want to call out to as well, because I think that sometimes we automatically make these assumptions when we see other indie developers come out into the space, especially if their games like skyrocket and everybody's talking about them, especially in those cases. But you said for your first project, hey, I did this, it was open world. But what was really important that I picked up on is like, I had a lot of this context because I just worked on several open world games and stuff. And it's like, I was familiar with it. I knew what to do. And I'm doing something that I really care about and will have fun with. So that context, that understanding, those skills and everything you've honed in and developed. Because sometimes I see people are like, oh, look, it was a solo dev or an indie dev that just did this really cool experience. And it's like, everybody's comes from different places. So you can't just lead in thinking, I know everybody's capable of doing these things, but it's just a matter of, is it going to be the right decision based off of skills, time, efficiency, and all those factors that we're talking about here today.
Yeah, and I think this is a pattern you actually see repeat a lot across the whole industry, where a game does really, really well. Like The Witcher, for instance. You can look at the Witcher games and how they like ramped up in complexity all the way to like Witcher 3, then became like this big open world, and it was a lot like Skyrim in a lot of ways. And like people build upon their previous knowledge to get better and better at making games, and then they tend to have like these breakout hits. And like that game Peak that came out for a while that did really well. Like they had a few games before that, like Another Crab's Treasure, and I'm blanking on their other game that I played where it's all about like corporate places and stuff. But they spent a while being indie and then had their breakout hits. It's good to build upon that and not assume you're going to have that in the first place, and approach it as a sustainable business. And part of that is shipping things. And then maybe you'll get to that point if you're lucky, but you're like rolling the dice every time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's a really good point too. Just because you're building up that skill base, you could be building up that audience too, or whatever you're building up. There's always going to be some level of risk. And again, it goes back to kind of that, I would say the overarching theme of this conversation is, but making it shippable can help maybe reduce some of that risk. For developers that are, let's say, still early in production, what would you say are choices that tend to have the biggest impact on whether their projects stay on track or not, especially if they're, let's say, more ambitious ones?
I think picking a project based on like what your strengths are is good, and just like moving a little outside of your comfort zone. Because if you're just like doing everything that you haven't done before, it's probably going to take you a long time. And like, I think it's good to be conscious of what you do want to bring other people in for. Like even though I did primarily solo developed games, I did get like that guy Clifford to do music for me. It's like, yeah, I like banged on piano a little bit and was in a horrible death metal band for a while. But the idea of me doing a whole soundtrack, like, that's probably not really worth my time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good distinction to make, because you call out it like, is that really worth my time? And that's something we don't always think about in the same way. And it's funny, as a homeowner, I'm looking at things from that perspective too, because it's like when I first got my home, I'm like, oh, I could do that. And yes, I learned a lot. I know a lot more about like fixing things and heating systems, more than I like to admit, honestly. But when you start leveling up, so to speak, and learning these things and what your real focuses are, what you're really good at, and where your time needs to be, And this is why I'm doing it to like little things like around the house type stuff or whatever dwelling you're in. It's like, yes, I could do that. Yes, there is a cost savings if I do these things myself. But what is that also taking away? Is it taking away time from your family? Is it taking away time from your development work on your project? What else is that doing? So in your case, like you said, it's like, yeah, I was in a heavy metal band. I know I could like put out something together, but the idea of just like a whole soundtrack just sounds like probably it sounded draining too. And you're like, nothing else would get done. And then it's really about, because we associate these time factors with cost. Time is money, right? But then we are like, oh, we'll save the money with the time. But then it's like, but now nothing's getting done, and that's not moving the needle.
Yeah, it's like this weird intellectual disconnect where people, oh, but I'll get it for free if I do it myself. Like, that's not free.
Yes.
That's literally, you could literally ship your game sooner and stuff if you just pay someone to do it. And that doesn't always make sense for everything. Like part of what I do like about solo dev is it's really easy to solve problems in a cohesive way where I'm making like the art and systems at the same time. But there are things that easily slot in that you can just hire a contractor to do. Like another one that I had some other people do is I worked with a publisher on the Axis Unseen to put it on consoles. Like I didn't work on one for the core game, but I started doing that myself to get it on the consoles. And I was like, this sucks. This is boring. I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
I don't even know if it's going to make money. So it made sense to have someone else like do that work who was an expert at it. And yeah, that theoretically costs money. Like the publisher covered it in this case, but still, that would have been a big chunk of my time. I probably would have spent like 6 months or something doing it. And I've known a lot of indies who have gone down that route of like, I'm going to sim ship on PC and consoles all by myself. And every single one of them has hated life. It's a miserable process.
Yeah. And I think a lot of this too, to make it more concrete, goes back to one of the things we shared earlier today was tracking your time and stuff. But then when you're tracking the time, what it is, and it's hard, but, and we're not going to go into it today, but there's a process where through that time tracking, you can then also put a dollar value on that. So let's say you have, you know, to do whatever project, account for extra hours just in case. It's something that's out of your skill set or whatever. And then calculate what is that dollar wise. And then when you can figure that out, you're like, oh, wait a minute. It costs this person to do it for X dollar an hour less. They're going to get it done in half the time that you're going to be able to project. Therefore, what is that cost savings there? And that's the way to probably the best way to approach it. Because again, like you said, we don't want to get into that mindset of, oh, but if I do it, it's for free. This way, you're going to quickly realize it's not for free. Your time is valuable.
And I think asset stores and stuff can be really useful too. I think there's a big difference between like an asset flip and using stuff like that smartly, where it's like, oh, am I going to make a whole menu system myself, or pay like $25 and get one and then modify it to like customize it for your game?
Yes.
That stuff can save so much time.
And I know people out, I know you guys, some of you are thinking, yeah, but there's this idea around assets and players pick up on it and stuff. It's like, well, what Nate said, if you customize and stuff, and even if they do, what is the percentage of people that are going to be calling that out in your game and being really upset that you did that? I would say not enough to worry about.
I think if people are calling that out, you probably have bigger problems and your game is just not great.
Yeah, because so
there's no reason to be making like menus and rocks and all these like super boring things in games. Like a lot of problems are solved problems. Like when they make movies, are they like, hey, we're going to invent fire and build every single building from scratch? No, that's dumb. That's super expensive.
Exactly.
But games are approached that way in a lot of cases. And you're like, well, no wonder it's not sustainable. That's nuts.
Yeah, exactly. So lots of different ways to approach these things. Nate, I know we're coming on time for today, and we talked a lot of different things. But based on that, our conversation, what are a few takeaways that you would like people to walk away with? Because I think there's a few good ones here, but what are the ones you would call out to most?
I think the biggest ones for me are to pay attention to production and your scheduling of things, even as an indie, and to pick your projects to a scale of ambition that makes sense and that is actually shippable.
I love that, especially like pick your project. That last one, pick your projects to that are scalable, but within your skill set essentially. Because it's again, well, as we talked about before with the other, like looking to other developers or other projects and stuff. Like, hey, do it within your own reason, your own means, and like you said earlier too, push yourself a little bit beyond your comfort zone too, but not too much, right? Try to find that sweet spot. And the only thing I'll add to that is make sure you're finding something that you're going to have fun with too. Not just something that's in high demand that maybe you have the skill sets for, but if you're like, I really hate doing that, don't.
Yeah. And you want to find that nice cross where it's like in your interests, but also viable. Like it's good to see if there's a market for it, but
absolutely
not have that be like the absolute prime driver. Like I'm not doing free to play mobile games.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Can't thank you enough for being here today, Nate. It's been a pleasure. Now, if people want to reach out, try to connect, what are some links or ways that listeners can do that?
I have my website, justpurkeygames.com, or you can find me on like Twitter and Purkeypile, and I'm basically everywhere else if you search for Nate Purkeypile, Instagram, TikTok, everything. As an indie, you kind of have to put it all out there.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
All that is also linked off the Steam page for like the Access Unseen.
Okay, great.
Which will be on sale in 3 days.
All right, excellent. So, folks, check it out. And, if you want to get in touch with Nate, check out his other games and everything else. What he shared with us and more will be on the show notes. So, Nate, thanks again for this conversation. It's really been enlightening.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saab for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.